Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, and I'm grateful to be with you tonight. I'm honored to host you at this year's annual dinner for the American Enterprise Institute and Irving Kristol Award. What an honor it is to see all of you here. This is the second largest gathering we've had in the history of this event. And we host this event tonight at an unsettling time for our nation, politically, economically, and in terms of national security. As I think all of you would agree, no matter what your individual political views, we face an extraordinary presidential election, one that is characterized by hope, to be sure, but also anxiety and polarization. We see historical levels of anger and distrust at the government and at political officials. Before I came to be president of AEI, I was a professor at Syracuse University, and one of the courses that I taught was called social entrepreneurship. I even wrote a textbook on that topic, which I do not recommend to you. In the course of studying social entrepreneurship, I found one very curious thing. Social entrepreneurs all have a strange quirk. They actually embrace tragedy and crisis, because they find in those things opportunity for progress. So let's be social entrepreneurs, and let's ask, what's the opportunity we see today in this unsettled time for our nation? To find the answer, let's start by recalling our core values. Now, as many of you know, at AEI, we believe in academic freedom and a competition of ideas, so we do not agree on very many things. Many days it feels like we agree on literally nothing. But there's one thing that we do agree on, which is our core values, and they're simple. At AEI, we believe in the radical equality of human dignity, and we believe in the right of each person to reach his or her potential. Those are the things that we base all of our work on at AEI. Dignity and potential are the why of our work. Our focus on free enterprise and American leadership around the world are due to the fact that each of us in our own way at AEI has come to the conviction that American enterprise and leadership are what bring the most people the best life. Now, with that in mind, why are so many Americans so angry today? Some say it's out-of-touch politicians. Others point to bad policies in trade or immigration or foreign policy. And we do, in fact, need good policies in these areas. But I believe those explanations are not quite right. Read the work of my colleague Charles Murray. You'll find evidence that we've separated ourselves physically and economically and morally from tens of millions of Americans at the bottom of the income distribution. Read the work of my colleague Nick Eberstadt, and you'll learn that 1 in 6 able-bodied working-age men today, largely those in the bottom half of the economy, are totally idle. Those left behind by the modern economy may not be missing a lot of meals, but they're not part of a system in which earned success always comes at the end of hard work. We have highly developed welfare systems in America that are good at helping people at the bottom of society. But you have to agree that we've become very bad at needing everyone in our society. The essence of dignity and potential is being needed economically and being needed socially. That is what we're failing to do today, and it's an abrogation of the American ideal. Like so many of you, most of you, I came from immigrants. My great-grandparents were orphans and poor and the wrong religion back home and with no education. They came through Ellis Island, where they would have seen, when they came through, a brand new structure called the Statue of Liberty. As all of you know, that statue has at its base a poem entitled The New Colossus. It exhorts the world to send to America, quote, "the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me," unquote. That, my friends, that wasn't just rhetoric. It meant something to my great-grandparents. It means something to my wife, who immigrated here as an adult and who today is an American by choice. What sets this country apart from so many others is not that we're richer, it's not that we're freer, although these things are generally true. What sets America apart is that we derive from a stock of ambitious riffraff, no better or worse than anybody, but determined to live a life of dignity and potential. Now, a month ago, for some reason, I used that turn of phrase about our ancestors. And afterward, there was a question and answer, and somebody put his hand up, and he stood up and he said, I tell you, I take great umbrage at the way you characterized my ancestors. They were not ambitious. But here's the problem. The result of our nation's policies over the past decades has been to render millions of people alive but superfluous. No wonder people are angry. Dignity and potential, they demand that we do better. The job of enlightened leaders and good public policy should not be to maintain people just above starvation. It should be to make each person necessary to the rest of us. That means an economy that's not overburdened by the state so it can attract companies and create all kinds of jobs. That means breaking the iron cage of conventional education and giving people the skills they truly need. That means fighting the tyranny of bigotry and discrimination. It means acting with assertive confidence all around the world and attracting and welcoming people from everywhere who want to earn their success in a free and strong country. Above all, and this is the most important to me and to you, it means remembering our moral duty to fight for people with less power than us, our brothers and sisters. The reason I'm proud to stand before you tonight is because these are the goals of the American Enterprise Institute. They're the reason my colleagues and I have dedicated our careers to this work. In the coming years, with your help, we will be dedicated to bringing America back together around these goals in a spirit of mutual respect and civil debate and national solidarity. AEI will stand for dignity and potential, and in this project, we will be your voice. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your friendship, and God bless this great country. And now it's on to our program. We have two goals tonight. The first is something that we've been already succeeding in, which is having fun together. It's the opportunity to come together as a community of scholars and staff and supporters and friends and enjoy each other's company. The second goal is to honor a giant intellect who shares our beliefs in dignity and potential with the highest academic honor that we bestow, the Irving Kristol Award. This is named in memory of our friend and colleague, the late Irving Kristol. Before we bestow that honor tonight, I'd like to turn the mic over to Bill Kristol, son of Irving and editor of the Weekly Standard, who will speak for a moment about his father. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Kristol.
Thank you, Arthur, and let me join Arthur in welcoming you all to the Irving Kristol Award dinner, and let me congratulate AEI for its magnificent new building, and as important, I would say, maybe more important, continuing for another year the really excellent tradition of scholarship and real contributions to public policy that AEI has been making for so many years. I also want to congratulate AEI for making such a worthy selection for the Irving Kristol Award in selecting Robbie George. I know it's a worthy and excellent selection because when Arthur told my mother that Robbie George was getting the award this year, my mother said Irving would have approved of that, which means it's an excellent selection. The Irving Kristol Awards, I'm pleased to say, have, if you look back, and I did this the other night, it's an excellent list, I've got to say, of awardees, which Robbie is a worthy successor to, or joins, a worthy joiner of, I suppose. I was struck, though, looking over the list, not just how distinguished the recipients are and how worthy they are, but how diverse they are, intellectually diverse and diverse in their own careers. There are 3 economists over the last 12 or 13 years in which the Irving Kristol Award has been bestowed, 2 prime ministers of foreign countries, I guess we don't have a prime minister, 2 historians, social scientist, a member of Congress, a social philosopher, Robbie, of course, a philosopher a student of moral philosophy and of constitutional law. It's a novelist. It's a very interesting list, and I think says something about the American Enterprise Institute that it really is different from many other worthy and useful think tanks here in Washington, which is that the American Enterprise Institute is about more than public policy solutions or innovative ideas and dealing with policy problems. It really, if you look at this list, it's a list that conveys, I think, the idea of liberal education. AEI, at its best, is an institution of liberal education, not just of public policy. A sound public policy ultimately depends, I think, on sound liberal education. A sound liberal democracy depends on a sound liberal education. As both Arthur and Robbie George know well, you can't quite count on the universities these days to do the job of liberal education. And AEI really, I think, plays a role even more important than the policy wonks and the congressional staff and executive branch officials who depend on AEI for guidance, who depend on AEI scholars for guidance, plays even a more important role than that. So Robbie George, as an awardee, is very much in that tradition of AEI recognizing a breadth of scholars and a depth of commitment to liberal education in the service of liberal democracy. I'll just say in closing that it's been, for some of us, a slightly depressing or demoralizing election year. I probably shouldn't even mention that, but who could resist, really? But the vigor and elan and success of AEI in the midst of this slightly gloomy environment should cheer us up. I was chatting with one AEI scholar whom I promised I wouldn't mention his name, but it was Ramesh Ponnuru, just an hour ago, who told me that I should cheer up, that the good news, we needed to train ourselves, he said, on election night to be cheered up that one of the 2 major party candidates would have lost. Which does not mean there will be a loser, let me hasten to say, but that's a little bit, I probably shouldn't have even said that, but that was but we do need to be cheered up, and it has a certain ironic distance on the day-to-day and week-to-week politics, which is probably healthy. So I really do feel, though, actually, that in a slightly gloomy or problematic political environment, AEI as a beacon of light and of intelligence becomes even more important, has played that role this year in such an important and crucial way, and will continue to do so in the future. I'm very pleased that Robbie George is the Irving Kristol Award recipient this year. I'm so pleased that AEI goes from strength to strength. And I'll close by reminding you of the great statement, I know John McCain likes to quote this, that don't worry too much. It's always darkest before it turns pitch black.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. As I mentioned before, the Irving Kristol Award is AEI's highest academic honor, and each year we recognize somebody of exceptional work to improve public policy, enhance social welfare, advance American culture, or build up the public discourse with unique contributions to the competition of ideas in our society. Past honorees that Bill alluded to a little bit have included statesmen such as Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, and Ronald Reagan, intellectual giants such as Robert Bork, Antonin Scalia, James Q. Wilson, economists from Paul Volcker to Alan Greenspan to Martin Feldstein, and many other extraordinary figures whose scholarship and leadership embody the unique beauty of the American idea. In the past 3 years, we've added Speaker Paul Ryan, Nobel laureate Eugene Fama, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to this distinguished roster. And tonight, a brilliant, deeply principled scholar and incisive thinker will join their ranks. This year's honoree is a leading scholar, teacher, and author. He teaches at Princeton University, where he holds the McCormick Professorship in Jurisprudence. His path-breaking scholarship features the law and the Constitution, ethics and natural law, and the intersection of religion, morality, and culture. He's written numerous books, including Making Men Moral, In Defense of Natural Law, and Conscience and Its Enemies. He's the founding director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. He's a board member of the Beckett Fund, the Bradley Foundation, the Hoover Institution, and the Witherspoon Institute. He has served our country as a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights and as a commissioner of the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom. He's received the President's Citizens Medal, our country's second highest civilian award, and he's arguably, and in my view, inarguably, the most consequential conservative intellectual in academia today. On behalf of the entire AEI community, our scholars, our staff, and our trustees, it's my honor to award the American Enterprise Institute's 2016 Irving Kristol Award to Professor Robert George.
Congratulations.
You're welcome.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Robbie.
Thank you so much. This is almost too great an honor to bear. Irving Kristol was not only a great thinker, he was a giant and a hero to me. Irving began to influence my own thinking long before I ever had the opportunity to meet him. Reading his essays, the work of other important scholars he published in the public interest, encountering that brilliance combined with courage, that fearlessness in facing facts head on and not letting ideology color the facts was absolutely inspiring to me and, of course, generations of young people who encountered Irving in that way. So to be receiving an award in honor of such a hero is really quite overwhelming, and I'm grateful, Arthur, to you and to the board of the American Enterprise Institute for this extraordinarily high honor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's our honor. I have a few questions for you. And the reason is that we're doing an interview is I couldn't decide on just one speech from Robbie. There's so much going on, the wide-ranging intellect, the interest in so many topics, that I wanted to cover a lot. And so this conversation is going to be pretty wide-ranging. And I want to start a place where Bill, where he alluded that the academy is not always the most hospitable place for the diversity of ideas, which sort of understates the point. We hear a lot of horror stories about open discourse in colleges and universities. You're a career-long academic. You're a well-known intellectual. So let's start with the obvious question. Are you a persecuted minority? And this is a safe space, I want you to know.
Well, maybe in this conservative audience, I should offer a trigger warning, because I'm going to say, no, I'm not a persecuted minority. I have flourished at Princeton University. It's not exactly a hotbed of culturally or economically or politically or morally conservative thinking. But nevertheless, I was never in the closet with my ideas. What I believed was well known when I was hired by Princeton, when I was given tenure, when I was promoted, and when I had the very great honor of being installed in the McCormick chair. So I am not a person who is in a position to complain that he has been persecuted. Now, having said that, I have seen what you have seen. There are people who have not been nearly so lucky. There are people who ought to be holding chairs at Yale or Stanford or Harvard or Princeton who are not, mainly because they've been victims of discrimination. And that's wrong. And many, many people in academia who don't necessarily share my conservative moral or political or religious convictions agree that it's wrong. And we have to unite with them. Conservatives and old-fashioned liberals alike need to unite to do something about that, not only for the sake of fairness, for treating people fairly, although that's very important, but perhaps even more importantly, to enable universities, colleges and universities, to fulfill their missions. So long as there are people who are excluded from academic appointment and preferment on the basis of their views, quite irrespective of the quality of their arguments, the excellence of their research, the mission of the university is being thwarted. Students are being denied the opportunity to hear competing points of view held by reasonable people of goodwill, to think them through for themselves and to make up their own minds. education then reduces to indoctrination. It's not education at all. So for the sake not only of fairness to people, but also for the sake of the mission of the university, so crucial to the well-being of our society, we do have to rebuild the fairness of academia, the integrity of academia, and not stand for the sort of discrimination that has excluded some people.
Here's a quick question as a follow-up to that. Our friends here love their alma maters. They love the universities they went to, but a lot of people here I know are worried about what's happening on the campuses that they graduated from. And they're wondering, how can I support my university, but at the same time not support a lack of intellectual freedom and indoctrination? Give our friends here a couple of real tips on how they can support the universities and not support the leftward drift and indoctrination.
Well, I think the goal should be to help universities be their best selves, to help universities live up to what remains their stated high ideals. The trouble is not the ideals the universities purport to subscribe to. The trouble is the failure to live up to those ideals in a great many cases. So the question is, how can alumni and others who care about the state of American higher education, who care about the institutions that educated them, how can they help? Well, I'll tell you one way they can help. At universities around the country, there are scholars who are doing outstanding work. There are teachers who are excellent in the classroom, who are educating students and not merely indoctrinating them. They're easy to find. You need to support them, especially financially. Support them. Empower them to do more of what they do so well. Arthur, as you know, in the year 2000, millennial year 2000, July 4th, 2000, we launched at Princeton the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. We've been going now for 16 years. Our mission, our goal, was to elevate the quality on the Princeton campus of civic education, to make civic education a serious undertaking, to empower our students really to understand the constitutional system, the Madisonian system, the system that conferred upon them the freedoms that they enjoy and the opportunities that they enjoy. And so we went to foundations and individuals who we knew believed in our mission, and we asked them to support us. We got some support, we went to the university, and the university did not say no. The university said, yeah, we're willing to let you give that a shot. And 16 years later, there's been really a transformation of the ethos on our campus, not simply in the areas that we specialize in, constitutional law and political thought. The knock-on effects have been to affect the quality of the conversation really across the arts and sciences, to bring true diversity of opinion and the exploration of ideas to our campus. Well, that can be done at a lot of other places. Now, perhaps it can't be done everywhere. There may be some universities that are simply at this point closed off to that. But we have seen centers modeled on the Madison program launched at campuses around the country. Johns Hopkins has the McHugh program. Harvard has just launched a program in integrative knowledge. The University of Chicago, which deserves high praise for its stands recently for academic freedom and academic integrity, is launching a program in moral philosophy. Yes, God bless the University of Chicago. I genuinely felt envy being a Princeton professor for the University of Chicago when I read the letter that they sent to their undergraduate students, to their freshmen. So, Arthur, all those sorts of programs can be supported, they can be built, but it takes a faculty member or two or three on campus who's willing to take on the mission, take on the work. It can be tough. It can be hard in the contemporary environment to do it. You need a university that's at least open, a university administration that at least is open to it. But now, of course, people who have that idea at an institution can point to Princeton or Harvard or Johns Hopkins or the University of Chicago. And you can say, if it was done then in those places, why can't it be done in these places? And then you need the support. You need the material support to make that happen. My dear friend and colleague, president of the Witherspoon Institute, Luis Tellez, has taken the lead in a project that we have called the Foundation for Excellence in Higher Education, which has as its mission trying to plant and build these sorts of programs either in universities as parts of universities like the Madison program, or as independent institutes or think tanks in university communities that partner with departments or institutes on campus to do that transformative sort of intellectual work that we've done in the Madison program. So you shouldn't just write off the universities. You should support the American Enterprise Institute and other worthy non-universities.
I want to underline that. I mean, I think it's important, very important, maybe the most important point.
But with what you've got left, you can make things happen at your alma mater or at other places. And if I can just say one more thing about that, I think it's very important in our current milieu for us to think of ourselves not necessarily or fundamentally as alumni of Yale or Ohio Wesleyan or Grinnell or whatever, but to think of ourselves as Americans, as alumni of American higher education, as people who care about higher education because we care about our society, and what goes on in our colleges and universities is going to profoundly affect our societies. So if you can't make what needs to happen at your particular alma mater, help somewhere else. There are lots of places around the country where you can make a difference. It's really worth doing.
Before we leave higher education, I want to quote something that you've said that I think is really actually very subversive. Students must earn the right to hold an opinion. What do you mean? Earn the right to hold an opinion. Sir, are you an elitist?
I may be something worse than an elitist. If you take that statement, as they say, out of context, I'm actually a tyrant. I'm denying people the right to have their opinion. What Arthur's referring to is I sometimes open my courses by saying to my students, we're Americans, right? They all say, right. As Americans, we have the right to our opinion, right? They say, right. And I say, wrong. And they're taken aback. Say, Professor George, you're saying we don't have a right to our opinions? Are you going to ram your reactionary opinions down our throats? And of course, that's not what I mean at all. Now that I've got their attention, I've got something to say to them. Well, in this classroom, you have a right to an opinion when you earn the right to opinion. And you earn the right to an opinion not by emoting your way to what you hold or think, but by thinking your way to the conclusions that you are going to hold. And I say, now I can tell you from experience, long experience, sometimes hard experience, that on all of the issues we're going to be covering in this course, and I teach courses in constitutional law, civil liberties, moral and political philosophy, so we touch on all the hot button issues. I can tell you from long experience, on every issue we discuss in this course, we're going to have reasonable disagreement. On all of these issues, reasonable people of goodwill disagree about what the right answer is or what position should be held. That's just a fact. That's just reality. Now, that's not to embrace moral relativism. It's certainly not to say that I myself don't have an opinion. I hold the opinion because I think it's true. But because reasonable people of goodwill can and do disagree about these things, to earn your right to an opinion, you have to understand, and I mean understand, not just be able to parrot it back. You have to understand why someone as intelligent, as well-informed, and as well-motivated as you may have reached a different conclusion. When you know why, when you can reproduce their argument and nevertheless give me your reasons for rejecting it in favor of the opinion that you hold, God bless you, you've earned your right to that opinion.
And there we are.
I mean, Arthur, if I can just say one more thing about, I mean, this is why, I mean, some people are surprised to learn that I regularly teach with my colleague Cornel West. Now, if you know Professor Cornel West, you know that although he was invited to our dinner this evening and wanted to come, he wasn't able to come because his mother's being honored out in Sacramento. But if you know Cornel West and you know anything about me at all, you know that Professor West and I don't agree on everything. We agree on almost nothing. And yet, the magic of our work together is exposing our students, extraordinarily bright, gifted, energetic, engaged Princeton undergraduates, many of whom are here, by the way, and thank all of my students and former students for coming, but exposing them to a situation where they really are hearing the competing arguments of two guys who are pretty passionate about their opinions, have pretty strong views, but are willing to argue with each other civilly, to engage each other's arguments, to listen, to be willing to learn from the other guy as well as to teach, to have no thought about calling each other names or shouting at each other or anything like that. I mean, I think the students in that circumstance learn not only by the content of what we say, but just by the example of how we conduct ourselves. So teaching with Cornel has been among the best experiences that I've had, and I think that my students have had in my 30 plus years at Princeton.
Let's move now to some of the opinions that you've earned. And I want to start with some opinions about the conservative movement in America today. You've given this a whole lot of thought. You may have noticed that there have been some changes in conservative politics of late. We've taken a somewhat populist turn with some pretty popular positions in Republican politics, at least, that were antithetical to a lot of conservatives' thought not so very long ago. Some say that's good, and some say that's bad. What do you see, and what do you think about it? And what do you see for the future of the conservative movement?
Well, I'm not a prognosticator, and I don't have a crystal ball. And one of the things that makes me a conservative is that I do not believe that the future is determined. Progressives learned from figures like Hegel and Marx to believe that there's a direction of history, that history moves forward quite independently of human deliberation, choice, and action. And that's why you so often hear people on the left taunting those of us on the conservative side by saying, you're going to be on the wrong side of history. You should change your view because you're going to be on the wrong side of history. They seem to believe that the script has already been written, and so the goal is to guess how it's going to go and then get on the right side of it. But I don't think we can really prognosticate because I don't think that script has been written. We're writing it, and we haven't decided. It's going to be our judgment, our deliberation, our choices, our actions, and those of our fellow citizens that determine it. So I'm much more comfortable making normative rather than predictive statements. And I know that upsets the apple cart for you social scientists who are in the business of predicting. But I don't think there's any future already written to be predicted, including a future of the conservative movement. But I will say this. I think it's profoundly important, Arthur, that conservatives, conservative intellectuals, conservative activists, conservative leaders, conservative men and women. And by the way, when I say conservatives, in many ways, we American conservatives are just old-fashioned liberals. Our conservatism is not the blood and soil, throne and altar conservatism of old Europe. Our conservatism is the liberalism of Madison and Tocqueville and Lincoln. That's been thrown over, of course, by the left. But that conservatism has some very, very important principles that must never be lost. And so it's going to be our job, no matter what happens on November 8th, it's going to be our job to hold fast to those principles, to reassert those principles, and to make them meaningful in our policy and public life. Now, the most fundamental of those principles, Arthur has already articulated. I think Bill has reinforced him in this. And that's an actual moral principle That's the principle of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family. On that principle, everything else rests. Everything else. Everything else. That's what Jefferson was saying when he wrote those immortal words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." All men, all men. That they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Reality is divided up into two things, persons and things, two entities, two categories, persons and things. We have to remember that the things exist for the persons, not the persons for the things. And persons are human beings. And all the things, economies, political systems, legal systems, educational institutions and systems, they all exist for the sake of persons, all of whom are equal, all of whom have fundamental worth and dignity, no matter how small, no matter how poor, no matter how vulnerable, no matter how weak. It just makes my heart flutter to hear Arthur articulate that as the foundation of the mission of the American Enterprise Institute. I wish our fellow citizens knew that that's what true conservatism, at least our conservatism, that's what AEI stands for, because so often people are misinformed and believe we think something quite different from that. So that's number one, and it's the foundation of the rest. Number two, the principle of limited government. Now, why do we have the principle of limited government? We have the principle of limited government because we believe in human dignity. It's because we believe in principle one. And we know, as Madison knew, as Tocqueville knew, as Lincoln, as a matter of fact, knew, that where government becomes totalistic, where it is not limited, where it is not checked, where power isn't hemmed in by countervailing power, human dignity will be the victim. The people with the power will begin to treat others, especially the weakest, especially the most vulnerable, not as persons, but as things. Everything will get reversed. So no matter how hard it is, no matter how much people think the cause of limited government is lost, we have to be faithful to that principle. Now, to say that we believe in limited government is also to say that we believe in the vital importance of having healthy, authoritative, intermediate institutions, what Tocqueville called the institutions of civil society, Burke's little platoons that do the main work in any society that's healthy of health, education, and welfare, that transmit the values and virtues that are necessary for successful lives and for successful polities to each new generation. Part of why we believe in limited government is not just individual freedom, though that is important, but it's not the whole story. We also believe in limited government because we know that unless government's limited, we've frozen out the space that's necessary for thriving institutions of civil society, beginning with the family, the marriage-based family, with institutions of religion, civic associations, all the little platoons that do that absolutely essential work. And we also know this from hard experience here in our own country. No one has taught us this better, this sad, sorry, hard lesson more than Charles Murray, who's sitting right here. And that's it's something we know. And that is that where those institutions of civil society collapse, we're not just going to have anarchy, though it'll look like anarchy. Someone's going to have to move in to play the health, education, and welfare role, to provide those functions that should be provided by the institutions of civil society, beginning with the family and religious institutions and so forth. That somebody will be the government. The government will have to do it. It will do it badly. But there will go limited government, because government's going to have to grow. It will have to become more intrusive. The burden of taxation will have to be higher to deal with the carnage that results when the institutions of civil society, beginning with the family, break down. Daniel Patrick Moynihan in 1965 was on to this in the report on the Negro family. We recently had a conference at Princeton back in 2015 to mark the anniversary of the Moynihan report. My friends, Pastor Eugene Rivers and Dr. Jacqueline Rivers from Harvard, were there at the conference, contributed to it. Everything that Moynihan predicted about the consequences of the breakdown of institutions of civil society, beginning with the family, have come true. Not only in the African American community, where Moynihan first perceived the problem, but as Charles's work shows, as Bob Putnam's work shows, as the work of David and Amber Lapp and so many others now show, it's also in the white working class communities, in our Rust Belt cities, in Appalachia and elsewhere in the South where I grew up. This is not a problem about race. It's a problem about culture. Now, government can't simply fix that, but government has a role to play, both positive and the negative role is not to usurp and undermine the authority and the integrity of the institutions of civil society. So when we argue for limited government, yes, let's make the case that we need it for individual freedom because that happens to be true, but let's not omit the rest of the case. We need it for the sake of the integrity and well-being of the institutions of civil society.
One of the institutions of civil society you've written about an awful lot, about which you're really passionate, are religious institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, houses of worship in the United States. And one of the not so ancillary issues is religious freedom and the assaults on religious freedom, not just in far-flung places around the world, but right here at home. A lot of our friends here today are not religious. So maybe you could explain to everybody here why you believe that every single person in this room, religious or not, should be as interested as you and I are in the American religion freedom question today.
Our founders were a mixed lot themselves. Some were more religious, someone like John Jay, very highly religious, others less religious. Jefferson denied being an atheist, and I take him at his word. He actually was not an atheist, but he was not an especially devout man. He was not a religious man. And yet, our founders across the spectrum understood the importance of religious freedom. Our Bill of Rights begins with the words, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." We get that principle in our Bill of Rights before we ever get to or abridge the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to assemble and peaceably petition the government for redress of grievances. And that, of course, before we get any of our Second Amendment rights, our Third Amendment, our Fourth Amendment, and so forth. Why did they, although they were a mixed lot, just as we're a mixed lot on religious questions, why did they think it was so essential? Two reasons, and they go back to those two principles that I've already articulated and that you announced at the beginning of the session. One is religion is critical to the dignity of the person. The reason we respect religious freedom is that we know that fundamental to the dignity of the person is the right and the duty. And the duty. It shouldn't be enforced by government, but it is a moral duty to raise the great questions of meaning and value, to raise the great existential and transcendental questions of human life. If we fail to raise those questions, we lose part of our humanity. If we go through life never asking those basic questions of meaning and value, what kind of human beings are we? We're not filling anything near our potential. Asking those questions, being serious about trying to answer them in an honest way, not with wishful thinking, but in an honest way, and then living with integrity and authenticity in light of one's best judgments about the correct answer to those questions, whether those judgments are theistic or non-theistic, whether they are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or atheistic, whatever they are. That quest, that willingness to raise and try to answer those questions and live with authenticity in light of our best answers is just integral to who we are as human beings, to our own fulfillment. If you deny the person the right to raise those questions, to answer them as best he or she can, to live with integrity, as they did in Nazi Germany, as they did in the Soviet Union, as they do in so many places in the world today, you are depriving people of their basic dignity, robbing them of an essential aspect of their humanity. So there's the first reason, Arthur, why we should respect religious freedom. But there's a second, and it goes to that second principle, the principle of the need for healthy, vibrant, flourishing institutions of civil society. At the foundation is the family, and then next in line, assisting the family in its fundamental health, education, and welfare functions, and especially assisting the family in the moral education and the thing that enables families to raise people who will be decent, honest, hardworking human beings, who lead successful lives, who will be good citizens so that we can have a successful polity, is religion, the institutions of faith. Now, people these days, my old colleague in New College, Oxford, Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens, they're very quick to condemn religion for everything. All the faults of the world are the fault of religion. And of course, there have been bad things done and are being done today in the name of religion. Nobody needs an education about that. But think of the amazing good, the percentage of true good that has been done because of the inspiration of faith. Sometimes the Christian faith, sometimes the Jewish faith, sometimes the Muslim faith, sometimes the Hindu faith. Great good has been done. And we rely on religion as what George Washington called an essential support to our civic order. Adams said that our Constitution itself is made for a moral and religious people and will not serve well any other sort of people. Now, he wasn't saying that if you're not religious, you can't be a good citizen. But he's saying that the principles of the Constitution are only going to function if the support of religion is abroad among the people to help them to lead virtuous lives. Because he himself and the other founders knew that while the constitutional system would, to some significant extent, remedy the defect of better motives, to use the actual language of the Federalist Papers, that it would enable us to have some measure of good government even in the face of a lack of virtue. I mean, the founders were very serious students of human nature, and they knew that people have a lot of faults. All of us had a lot of faults. They know that they themselves had a lot of faults. But they also knew that more than that was required, that mere constitutional limitations just by themselves, absent virtue in the people, would never be able to sustain Republican government, that it would collapse the way it had collapsed elsewhere, all across the globe, all across human history. So they understood the essential role of religion in supporting personal and civic virtue. So the dignity of the human being, the important role of religion in our civic life, both of those considerations underlie our conviction, as they did the founders' conviction, about the importance of religious freedom.
I want to stay on the topic of morality and virtue here for a minute, but I also want to shift to economics. And that might sound a little strange to a lot of people, because we on the political right have made the case for the free enterprise system on almost entirely functional terms for a long time. You don't make that error. You don't make the error of considering our free enterprise system to be one only of material wealth. Tell us, in your view, what's the moral case for the free enterprise system?
Well, it's a complex one. I'll only be able to say a couple of words about it here. Our friend Yuval Levin and I are planning a book on precisely that issue. And it's because we, like you, have noticed that so often the case for the market economy is made just on the basis of utility or efficiency. And really, there's a strong argument to be made for the market on grounds of morality. And there are many dimensions to that. Let me just highlight a couple. First, of course, is the freedom of people to assess their own needs and the needs of others, and to work to meet those needs and the needs of others. It's a moral problem and not just a practical or utilitarian problem. When you try to plan an economy and try to figure out, by having an elite up at the top commanding the economy, to use Hayek's example, trying to figure out how many baby carriages we're going to need next year. The market does that extremely well. It meets people's needs. It enables people to meet each other's needs by applying their intelligence to the problem. Now, people also have an economic incentive to do that, but that incentive isn't necessarily simply a matter of greed. Why do people want to make money? Sometimes people want to make money just because they're greedy, of course, and greed in itself is a vice. But most people I know who want to make money in order to support their families, in order to support causes that they believe in order to do things with money that are helpful to themselves and to their families and to others. And the efficiencies of the market there have really deep moral implications. So the first point I think to be made about the morality of the market is that one. The other thing is that a system cannot be morally embraced. An economic system cannot be morally embraced if it immiserates large numbers of people. And as I have argued in my classes with Brother West, if we look at the history of socialism, not just in its more extreme forms, in its communistic forms in places like China and Russia and Cambodia, if we look across the globe, socialism tends to immiserate the very people that it's supposed to help. And that's the main competitor to the market economy. The market economy, by contrast, has elevated literally millions, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. That in itself is a moral argument for the market. Now, what we don't want to do is imagine that all we need to tend to is the market, that the market, even apart from the question of the virtue of the people, will produce everything we need to have a healthy society. It won't. The market can only play its role, as essential as it is, in building a good society, a humane society, a society in which human dignity is respected, if the other institutions are healthy too. The cultural institutions, the political institutions, the legal system, the educational institutions. They have to play their part for the market to function well in doing its part. And then the other thing that I think we have to be cognizant of is we never want to let the market do anything that itself undermines the well-being of the institutions of civil society that we rely on to produce the kind of virtue that enables the market economy actually to work. So if we are permitting the sale of things we should not permit the sale of, if the market is undermining healthy morality, healthy institutions of civil society, that's going to be a problem. After all, for businesses to flourish, for firms to flourish, they rely on there being workers who come to work on time, not drunk or high on drugs, who don't steal even if they have the opportunity to steal, who put in a day's work for a day's pay, and are reasonably conscientious. Nobody has perfect workers, of course. We're not perfect human beings, but businesses rely on that. But where the family has collapsed, look at places like some inner cities, some rural areas where we have the kinds of phenomena occurring that Charles has pointed to. Well, you do not have a workforce that can be employed. You do not have people who are capable of making a market economy function in a way that is good for them and for everybody else. So if you want it to work, you need all the institutions of civil society, including the market, working together toward healthy, virtuous ends.
We're near the end of our time, and we've covered a lot, but here's how I want to close. You know, in any election season, it's easy to be pessimistic. It always is. It doesn't really matter what year it is, and this year is no different than any other. In all the years that I've known you, one of the characteristics that stands out the most is that you're not a grouchy conservative. You're relentlessly positive, and I guess how much do you drink? I mean, that's not my question.
All that Valium.
Here's my question, Robbie. As we close tonight, as a happy warrior, as an optimistic, aspirational person, give us the reason here in this room that we can take forward in America today, that we can, as the American Enterprise Institute, take forward in our work. Give us the best reason you can come up with for us to be optimistic today.
Can I make you a counteroffer? Let me give you reasons to be hopeful. I think hope is more important than optimism, and I do think that there are many good reasons for hope. I myself find them working with our young people, working with my students. I mean, it's hard to be down despite what, as you all know, has gone on in universities where speakers like even Condi Rice are being disinvited from speaking because they're regarded as politically incorrect, and students don't feel free to speak their own minds, and people are hassled because of their point of view and so forth. We all know about all that stuff. And yet, despite that, I see my brilliant and courageous students up there standing up, speaking out, defying the political correctness, and frankly, winning the campus debate. Now, how can you not be hopeful when you see that going on? I've got students here, I'm going to mention a few names. I mean, I've got Sharif Girgis, who's here, Daniel Mark, Rabbi Meir Soloveichik, Melissa Moskela. I could go on. And when I see these brilliant, courageous young people standing up against the nonsense and prevailing, gosh, you know, how can you be down about that? How can you be pessimistic about that? That's grounds for hope. And I see the work of our young people in the military, you know, fighting in dreadful places and standing up for our country, even when it's not popular. And I have friends who, within their own domains, their own faith traditions, their own spheres of work, who are fighting courageously for religious freedom, not just here at home, but abroad as well. My colleagues, some of my colleagues, including Jackie Wolcott, Ambassador Jackie Wolcott, is here tonight on the U.S. Commission on International Freedom, which I had the honor to chair until last year. Standing up, my dear friend Sheikh Hamza Yusuf from the Muslim community, who's here tonight, who has a target on his back from ISIS because he stood up and defied ISIS. When I see people... Yeah. When I see people doing that, Arthur, I'm not going to get down, because when you have that kind of personnel, you can make good policy. We just have to not give up. We just have to not give in to despair. We need to exemplify the virtue of hope, and my friends, hope is a virtue.
Before we finish, I want to make one more observation. And I think this is cause for optimism, and it's worth remembering. The conversation we're having here tonight, I guess it's pretty highbrow, but you know, it really is pretty subversive. We've talked about the need for limited government. We've criticized different kinds of thinking for people who are in power. There will be no knock in the night. There will be no jackbooted thug. This great country makes this possible. And isn't that the greatest source of hope, that we can have Robbie George with us saying these things here tonight?
Thank you. Thank you. You know, Arthur, it's always been this way. When Irving Kristol was a young man, you know, he was sent off to war to fight the Germans as an infantry man, and you know, this man who would become a great intellectual and great inspiration was a soldier out there fighting the Nazis. My beloved father's 91, about to turn 91 years old. He's here this evening. He was sent off at 18 to fight the Germans. He's wearing his cross as a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor of France, which he was awarded for his valor in fighting in Normandy and Brittany. And heavens to goodness, we've got B. Himmelfarb with us. We've got B with us. Who can be down when you've got B. Himmelfarb, Irving's beloved wife, with us?
Yeah, indeed. We've come to the end of this interview, and this is the best honor that we can. I think that reflects the best on the American Enterprise Institute. That this is the academic honor and the honoree that reflects our values, reflects the ideas, and reflects the competition of ideas that are fundamental to a free society, which has characterized what we've done here. So, in closing, there's nothing left to do except to thank you for your work, to thank you for the blessing that you give to us here tonight and the blessing you give to America. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Professor Robert George.
Thank you. Too kind, Arthur. Thank you. Thank you.